Although this channel is mostly about hiking, there's one thing that I've been wanting to try for a really long time. A bikepacking trip with e-bikes here in Italy that would also involve a lot of riding on unpaved mountain roads. And with that, I mean a proper bikepacking trip of around 1,000 kilometers. The main problem with this is that I want to do it together with my wife, and I had only one e-bike. So I started looking around, and one of the best options that I found was the Engwe E26 fat tire e-bike. I chose this one specifically because it has fat tires, so it would be really comfortable. It's cheap and the brand is somewhat popular. It has a good range. The weight also isn't really that terrible for a fat tire e-bike, and it's also 100% road legal here in Italy. I reached out to Engwe and they agreed to send it to me for free if I do a review on this channel, which basically is this video. So no money exchanged, but they did send this bike to me for free. So far I've done just over 400 kilometers with this e-bike, so I think that now I'm ready to give you a proper review of it where I tell you all the good things that I like about it, but also the things that I don't. I'll start with all the things that I don't like about this e-bike. And the first one is the mud guards. Don't get me wrong, they do work very well at keeping the mud off. However, the problem is that they're made from metal. So whenever you're driving after rain, all the smaller rocks and dirt get stuck in the tire and then get thrown against the mudguard, making a pretty annoying sound when you're driving. Having said that, this sound was a bit more annoying at the beginning because as you keep driving this thing, on the bottom side of the mudguard, a layer of mud builds up over time, so the sound isn't as annoying and loud anymore. At the beginning, the front mudguard also was making a rattle when you were driving it because as the mudguard was shaking, these two metals were touching each other on the underside of the mudguard. But I fixed that by putting a small piece of rubber between both of them. Another thing that was making it rattle at the beginning was the bike stand, because as I was driving, this thing was shaking and there was metal to metal contact over here. I fixed that by gluing a small piece of rubber on the bike stand. Another rattle was coming from the derailleur because as I was hitting potholes, it was touching the rear sprocket. So again, there was metal to metal contact, which was making quite a rattle. I fixed that by adjusting this screw to make the rear derailleur a bit further away from the sprocket. After making all of these changes, I would say that I fixed maybe 70–80% of all the rattles. Now it feels like a somewhat quiet bike, like a normal bike. As you can tell, there's still some rattle going on, most notably from the fork as well as the rear derailleur, but most of it is gone. Another thing that I didn't like is the wiring here at the front. Unfortunately, I didn't make a video in the beginning, but someone at the factory did a pretty sloppy job of managing all the wires over here. Some were too long, some were too short, some were too loose, and you could definitely tell that as you were turning the front wheel. I fixed that by undoing all the cable management sleeves over here by taking out the battery and screwing the bracket that holds the bottom wires in place, and then redoing everything. And now I think it looks pretty clean and tidy, but this should definitely have been done at the factory. Now I'll cover some things that I thought in the beginning for sure would be an issue, but actually aren't that bad. Starting with the front fork, it isn't hydraulic. Initially, I thought that it wouldn't be able to handle bad terrains very well. But realistically, the worst types of roads that I usually use this e-bike on are paved roads with potholes, gravel roads, or good quality trails. So realistically, you cannot even tell that the front fork isn't hydraulic. You can only start to feel that the front fork isn't hydraulic when doing some serious off-roading with some very large rocks. But as I said earlier, I don't do these types of terrains very frequently, so for me, the suspension is more than comfortable enough. Initially, I didn't like the screen too much because, well, first of all, it isn't too bright, and also if you touch it, if you accidentally press on it, it leaves these black marks which go away after a few seconds, but still, it means that the screen probably isn't too high quality. So far, I've driven 438 kilometers with this bike and nothing has happened to the screen. And also, I can see everything very easily and very quickly, even when wearing sunglasses, even though the screen isn't too bright. And the last thing that I wasn't excited about was that it doesn't come with a torque sensor. A torque sensor is usually mounted inside of the frame and it can detect if you're pressing the pedals and also how hard you're pressing the pedals. And it adjusts the power output based on how hard you're pedaling, as well as which power setting you've selected. On this e-bike, there are 5 pedal assist speeds ranging from 1 to 5. And the way that it works is that when you start pedaling, after about 1 second, the power starts to kick in, and it will assist you until you reach a certain speed. On the first speed, it will assist you to roughly 13 kilometers per hour, and if you go any faster than that, it will stop assisting you. And on the 5th speed, this is up to 25 kilometers per hour. You'll usually find this system on most cheap e-bikes because it's easier to manufacture. However, I personally think there are 2 main downsides with this. If you're going up a super steep technical hill, you can't realistically go slower than 13 kilometers per hour, which means that you'll have less control and you're more likely to fall. And the second issue is that you always have to keep the bike at a certain speed. And this is a problem if you're riding with someone else who doesn't have an e-bike or who has an e-bike with a torque sensor, because they will always be adjusting their speed based on how steep the road is and other conditions. But you'll stay at a constant 25 kilometers per hour, and if you want to keep up their pace, you constantly have to be switching between 2 different speeds. For the first maybe 30 kilometers, there definitely was a learning curve when riding this e-bike, but honestly now it isn't really an issue for me anymore. Of course, having a torque sensor would be better, but then again it adds additional weight, additional price, and it's also something that could break in the future. So realistically, when considering all the factors, I think that the fact that this thing doesn't come with a torque sensor isn't that bad. But now let's talk about all the things that I like about the E26. First of all, and most importantly, it is 100% road legal here in Italy, which means that I don't need to buy additional insurance for it, I don't need to get number plates for it, and that I can legally ride it on trails as well. That's because it has a 250 watt motor, the pedal assist only works up to 25 kilometers per hour, and the throttle also technically works, but only up to 5 kilometers per hour. The exact rules are a bit different for each country in Europe, but more or less it should be legal in most European Union countries. Realistically, I stay on the limited setting 100% of the time, and I don't really feel the need to unlock it. However, if you want to, you can of course unlock it to make it go faster. To unlock it, you need to press the plus and minus button at the same time. Now when this screen opens, you need to press the plus button and hold it for 15 seconds. All right, now I need to restart the bike, and it should be on the unlocked setting. Let's try using only the throttle. Up to 46 kilometers per hour. If you want to go back to the locked setting, first of all, you need to turn it back on, and then you need to press the lights button, which is this one, as well as the plus button at the same time. Now you'll enter this screen, then you press the plus button once, and then this button once, and now when I restart it, it should be back in the locked setting. Now let's try the throttle again. Yeah, and as you can see, it barely picks up any speed at all. So now it's back in the locked setting. I also recently tested its range, and it did pretty well. On a full 100% battery, I was able to get 65 kilometers of range on a moderately mountainous terrain with the total elevation gain of 1700 meters. This was mostly on paved roads, but also a bit of gravel roads. On a very flat and good terrain, I would guess that I could get a range of about 100 kilometers, and on a very extremely mountainous terrain, going uphill very frequently, I guess the range would be closer to 30-40 kilometers. I would say that this is a pretty typical range for a cheap e-bike of this size. However, the range is a bit better compared to my other e-bike. The battery charges fully from an empty state in about 5 to 6 hours. The E26 is slightly lighter compared to my other e-bike, weighing at 34.5 kilograms. Now, of course, that is pretty heavy, but for a fat tire affordable e-bike, it actually isn't that much. So what does this mean in real life? Well, if I need to, I can carry it upstairs. Of course, it still feels pretty heavy, but I can do it if needed. And also, if I run out of battery charge, I can pedal with it fairly easily on a flat terrain. I can also go uphill on moderately steep terrains without any pedal assist, but I wouldn't really do it unless necessary, because it is pretty hard. One feature that I think is really useful is that if you hold down the minus button, it will go into assist mode, which essentially means that it goes at a very slow speed, which I think is super useful if you're trying to push it up very steep hills. It comes with hydraulic disc brakes, which work very well, and so far I haven't had any issues with them. So far I've done about 400 kilometers with this e-bike, and the brake pads are about halfway through, which means that I'll probably need to change the brake pads at 900 or 1000 kilometers. The lights are also pretty good, both the front and the back ones. When I'm riding in complete darkness, I can see very well everything ahead of me. And the last thing that I like about it is that overall this thing is extremely comfortable, and that's actually the main reason why I prefer fat tire e-bikes over gravel ones. Now, of course, there is one very big downside by going with a fat tire e-bike, is that it will probably be about 10 kilograms heavier compared to a narrow tire gravel e-bike. And the additional weight makes it a bit more awkward to ride on very narrow trails because it's harder to control, as well as do any steep uphill sections. However, realistically, when I'll be bikepacking, I'll probably won't be on these types of terrains. I'll most likely be on paved roads, on gravel roads, or in worst case on light off-roading. And on places like these, this thing is extremely comfortable because of the super wide tires, because of the wide seat, the raised handles, and the front and the seat suspension. So should you get the Engwe E26 fat tire e-bike? Well, I won't deny that it is always a bit risky to go with an e-bike that's manufactured in Asia and is very affordable. For me personally though, I haven't had any major issues except for a few rattles, as well as a few adjustments that should have been made at the factory but weren't done properly. If you aren't afraid to get your hands dirty and do a bit of maintenance, then I think that it's totally fine to go with a cheap e-bike from Asia. But would I recommend the Engwe E26 specifically? I think I would, because on a sale you can catch it for about $1,000, which really isn't a lot for a fat tire e-bike. Of course, I did receive this one for free because I have my benefits of being a YouTuber, but if I would have paid $1,000 for this thing, I definitely wouldn't regret it. But if you're getting it closer to 1.4K, which is actually the current price on the EU website, then I'm not saying that it's a bad deal, but I would think twice about it. For comparison, on the US website, it's about $1,000 right now. And for that price, I think it's a really good deal. Anyway, regarding the bikepacking trip, I think you can expect to see it on my channel maybe in the spring because of personal reasons that I don't really want to get into right now. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. I hope this video was useful to you. If it was, please subscribe and I'll see you in one of my next videos. Bye!